Right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we should start. As I've said, my name is Hein van Eck. I'm the Business Development Manager for Executive Education of the College of Business and Economics here in Abu Dhabi. You might not know it, but we have a campus here in Abu Dhabi itself, although the main campus is in Al-Ain. It is then my privilege and honor to, on behalf of the Dean of the College of Business and Economics, to welcome you all here at the third session of this nature of our STEPS Forum at the College of Business and Economics. The STEPS Forum, ladies and gents, is basically the acronym for Seminars and Talks on Executive Education and Postgraduate Studies. And the purpose thereof is to invite senior people from industry to share their thoughts, their experience, their insights and topics that we deem to be of interest to the business community at large. And today we are quite privileged to have two very senior people of that nature. Before I introduce our two speakers, I would just like to spell out a few Q&A or few rules, housekeeping rules. If you have a question, we have time at the end, 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how long our two speakers take, to host such a Q&A session. And we have Dr. Vladimir Janopolchek, who's Associate Professor here at the University of the College of Business and Economics at the UAE. If you have a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Right, ladies and gents, basically, why digital technology in the healthcare sector? I think we have no qualms about the pervasive nature of digital technology in the world we find today, whether it is in business community, whether it is in whatever. Technology has come to stay, and it's made serious inroads in terms of business model innovation, in terms of how we deal with issues. And the broad spectrum of sectors you can think of, digital technology is there. And something which is very close to us is obviously our health sector. In other parts of the world, we find that the health sectors are bringing, or digital technology in the health sector is bringing medical care to the people at ground level. In the world that we live in here in the GCC environment, it is somewhat different. Hence, I've asked Mr. Frederik Bisbjerg and Mr. Hein van Eck, respectively from Daman and from Mediclinic Middle East, to share their views and their thoughts on this. Allow me to introduce more formally Frederik. He's a highly respected international business developer with expertise in digital transformation and business model innovation. He is the Executive Director of Digitization here at Daman National Health Insurer, one of the largest health insurers in the GCC environment, where he oversees the company's digital transformation initiatives, building a digital-first, flexible and resilient insurance company. He also holds the position of the head of MENA and digital transformation specialist with Daman. Before that, he was the executive vice president for Qatar Insurance Group, which is one of the largest, or was the largest composite insurer in the MENA region. He will be speaking first, whereafter he will be followed by Mr. Hein van Eck, who is a well-seasoned chief strategy officer at Mediclinic Middle East. He has 20 years of experience in leadership, strategy, operations, and business growth across both local and global healthcare landscapes. In addition to strategy and digital transformation, he's also responsible for a range of other activities and functions within Mediclinic Middle East, including then driving business development and growth in the UAE. Ladies and gentlemen, I think without further ado, I'm now going to ask Frederik to do his presentation. We have given each one of our speakers half an hour. So without further ado, Frederik, over to you.
Good morning, and I'm really happy to be here. I think I'm probably going to talk 15, 20 minutes tops, because I wanted to have this discussion afterwards, which I'm looking much forward to. But what I'll be talking about this morning is something. Let me just start. I was moderating a session in Dubai yesterday in the insurance industry, with a focus on insurtech and the potential disruption of our industry. The thing is that I don't think anybody will disagree that the future is digital. I don't think anybody disagrees that we are looking at, various very interesting technologies, Internet of Things, the way that you use your mobile phones, your watches to track you. And even when you look at business development, how you optimize the way your business is run, there are so many, as you said, so many digital technologies and initiatives that you can use to prioritize and optimize the work that you're doing. However, and that was the topic of yesterday and also a part of the topic today, we have only 5%, maybe 10% of the industry who actually knows how to leverage all these technologies fully. And that means you have a large portion of the industry who's not leveraging it fully. And I would like to discuss why that is, and I would like to discuss how you can take steps toward leveraging this technology, because I think one thing is to discuss this and be very enthusiastic about what's possible and discuss the future. But I also want to make sure when you come back home to your company that it's possible for you to execute on these plans. And I know from the discussions I had yesterday, and of course from my experience, that the vast majority of insurers, they cannot get this executed. And it's not because they don't want to. It's just because maybe the angle of attack could be improved a little, and because they're unaware of where the world is going and how to run organizations in the future. And that's going to be my topic today. I'm very excited to be here. So I'm going to share my screen. And you introduced me very well from Daman. In Daman, I have the privilege of leading the implementation of our digital vision, which is to put digital at the heart of the UAE healthcare system. We are in a position to do so. We have 2.5 million members that we, through our digital systems, connect to more than 4,000 providers in all channels, from physical branches over, of course, digital, but also to our recently launched virtual branches, Hayako. And I wanted to tell you how the industry, not necessarily Daman only, but the industry reacted to the pandemic. And this is important because it leads up to what we have to do next. When the pandemic happened, I think you can split this into 2 waves. The first was, I wouldn't say we panicked, but everything was all of a sudden closed. So everybody had to mobilize whatever they could to get the documents required, have to accept scanned documents instead of the physical documents. Cash payments would also be difficult, so we had to look into how could we get checks and bank transferred. And what was interesting here was, of course, in the first wave, nobody in the industry had time to change the document requirements or to change the processes. So we did exactly as we did yesterday, just a little bit more cumbersome. Well, obviously, once this first wave started to wear off, we could look into working smarter, because at that point in time in the industry, everybody was working 24/7. So the industry had to say, okay, we need to reorganize. We had to reshuffle people so we could become just a little bit more efficient, because this was killing people. People were working too much. So the workflows were improved. We were looking at introducing robotics, optical character recognition systems, and smarter ways of working with our customers within our organization to make our turnaround times better and so forth. I think it's interesting here to note that the processes remained the same. Yes, we were working smarter and faster, more efficient. We took some workflows. Instead of moving the paper, we moved the digital. We went from, I think a guy yesterday, he said it, maybe a little provocative, but he said he started in the industry 25 years ago, where everything was submitted by fax. And the biggest difference he sees when he looks now is everything the same is submitted by email, right? And I think it's a little provocative, but it points to one thing that I do know is that in the industry, the way we work behind the scenes has changed very, very little since I don't know how many years, since at the time I've been in the industry for 12, 15 years. And this is actually where most organizations is today. And this is the point of departure that we have to remember, because when we are talking business transformation, when we are talking building a sustainable business for the future, we must realize that the world is changing significantly faster now than it most likely has ever done before, and that will not stop. And I can see now the gap between the change in world and the change in the insurance industry as a whole is widening. So we also have to rethink how do we work with our business transformation and digital transformation. One of the things that, just to give you an example of customer experience, traditionally or historically, insurers, or most in the financial industries, they've compared themselves to their peers to see, okay, how well are we doing on customer service in our customer journey, customer experience. The problem is that our customers, they don't compare us to our competitors. They compare us to Netflix or Google or Amazon. So when they come to us, they have expectations set by Google, set by Amazon, set by Netflix. And that is actually how they compare us. They're used to, on these websites, everything is served for them, almost already digested. They just have to click a button and then everything is done. When they go to the financial services industries and in the insurance industries, it is still the processes of document submission. It is still the processes of doing things in a lengthy and difficult way. And this is very important to remember. Our competitors is not necessarily the insurance companies next door, but other digital entities. And when we're looking forward, I just would like to bring this quote from Elon Musk, because I think it is fantastic. He says, the most common error of a smart engineer is to simplify and optimize the design. And this is exactly what I'm talking about, because we are looking at our existing processes and then we say, what would we like? We would like to do what we do today, but faster. And that is just completely wrong. We have to rethink the whole process. We have to look at, does this process even need to exist? And that is our point of departure. This is where we should start when we start thinking about preparing our organization for a sustainable future. Now, I brought this quote also, or definition of what you could call digital transformation, but it's actually not, because it's a business process re-engineering definition from the 80s. I'm not going to read it here, but I'm bringing it up because when we are talking about business transformation, I know that the buzzword at the moment is digital transformation and digital technologies, but it is so important to remember that transformation is nothing but a redesign of how we work today. Yes, we add digital tools because it is there now and it's smarter and it's faster, but we are again basically working with people and processes. And when you're building a future company or changing your existing company, it is so important that you remember this, because you shouldn't put technology first. You shouldn't put all the fancy things first, because that's not going to work. And I can show you, because when we are looking at digital transformation initiatives, then there is a 70% failure rate. There's a 70% failure rate, meaning that 70% of all digital transformation projects started, they do not deliver on the promise that they were initiated to deliver on. We also have a problem because we can't not do this transformation, as I hope is clear from what I've said so far. So we have to take a step back and say, okay, what do we do then? And of course, it's understanding what we do is worth looking at. Why is it goes wrong, right? Because it's been around since the 80s, as I said, maybe far before with the Japanese revolution before. So here are at least 6 things that are some of the reasons that we are not succeeding with our transformation. The first is what I spoke about, is the digitize versus digitalize. For me, digitizing is when you take your existing forms and turn them into PDF and send them via email instead of fax. Digitalization is taking a step back and understanding, do we actually need this process? I have a good example. I spoke with the board of directors in one of the largest insurance companies in Saudi Arabia the other day, and we were talking of exactly this. In Saudi, the financial institutions have full access to a wide range of data from the government. Today, if you want a health insurance in Saudi, of course, you need to submit a lot of documents to understand your eligibility and the price and all these things. It is 12, 15 documents that has to be submitted, and then somebody in the back office, they have to look at the paper and then proceed. Now, most of the insurance companies in Saudi, they are deploying RPA and optical character reading to make this process faster and eliminate the need for people. But few of them, actually there's only one to my knowledge, have actually asked the question, why do we need this piece of paper? It turns out that all of these pieces of paper, they answer a question. So where does this person reside in this city, in this region? How much is the salary of this person? These are the questions that needs to be answered. We don't need to see a salary certificate. We need to see a number or yes or no. And this information can be retrieved from the government. So this one company, they completely eliminated the process because it's not needed. They have one call to the government entity and they get all the answers and then it's done. And that's what I'm talking about. This is thinking differently. We're not doing what we did yesterday faster. We're doing something completely different. That eliminated the need for the whole back office overnight. So that is I'm spending a little extra on this topic because this is probably the most important topic of these 6. There's also what you can call the ivory tower effect. Most insurers have a lot of data and can generate a lot of knowledge about the customers, the operations. Also, in most cases, this information is within the data department and never gets anywhere else. So you have a unit who is spending a lot of time analyzing and looking at data, but they keep it with them. And it's not because they don't want to share it, because of course they will, but it's more because nobody asks and they're not thinking proactively on getting it done, which is also one of the reasons that we don't go as fast as we want, because we have these traditionally have these silos in the organizations where this is my operational unit and I'm not really talking to the other one unless we have problems, and this is what we are seeing here, and also goes to the next. When we are looking at the projects we are doing, we are looking at ourselves and how can we do this better internally, instead of thinking of what is it that the people who pay our salaries they actually want from us. This is back to the discussion about Google, Netflix, Amazon versus your competitors, right? So that's from a project perspective. From a leadership perspective, when we do these transformation projects, we tend to say, okay, this is something we can put on top of what else we are doing, because we cannot disrupt or stop our day-to-day work. So we just add a little extra, and that's impossible. If you do change projects, you go all in. You can't add it on top of a busy day for many reasons. First, I mean, if you focus on too many things, you focus on nothing. And second, you don't really go anywhere. And if you don't really go anywhere, then you lose the motivation to move ahead fast. So from a leadership perspective, and then of course it's also difficult to go get budgets to hire more people and all these usual things. But if you want to do this, you go all in or you don't do it. The last thing of the things is, if you want to have people with you, you need to give them a motivation to do so. Because yes, I'm saying that one of the problems is that we add this work on top of other daily duties that they have. In most cases, it is the case. I mean, you still take 50% of the workload away, but and then give the other 50% to this project. But that is more effective if you have a realistic why are we doing it. Saying because we want to save FTEs is not a very good motivator to do a project. Saying because we want to make more money is not necessarily a good motivator for a project. Saying, you know, we are doing this because we want to establish our company as the center of digital healthcare in the UAE, to me, that is a very good why. So when we're working towards this, we can see we are actively influencing, we're taking a part in influencing the health care of a whole country. That is a good why for me. And then if you can hang your projects on that, then you are starting to motivate people to give that extra effort to get this to work. So these are the reasons, and the reason that most projects fail is because we don't put that why. We don't spend enough time on selling the vision, so to speak. Now, how do we do it then? Because one thing is identifying all the things that are wrong, but we also have to devise some kind of way forward, right? In my experience is one of the reasons also that this project doesn't work, it is that they are all-in projects. So we start and say, okay, we're going to transform the whole company, and we start now, which means that you basically pull away the carpet under a whole company, and nobody knows where to land on their feet again. If you're going to do this, in my experience, you're going to do it project by project, unit by unit, process by process. So a very fantastic starting point is to understand where does it hurt the most in our company. Take a look at your value chain and say, okay, where do we have the biggest problems, challenges, or the greatest opportunities? What is the critical path for our customers or whoever is using our services, and where is it we should start? So this is a good and pragmatic point of departure. And don't forget your customers, because this is at the end the whole reason that you have a company, right? So start in a small project and move on from there. This is what I see works. And back to the vision, because it is perfect. I mean, we're doing this because we want to change our companies in a long-term perspective. And when we have the long-term vision, saying we want to be put digital in the heart of the healthcare in the UAE, that is a long-term vision. It also enables us to take all the smaller initiatives and say, okay, how will this initiative help us move the needle towards that? And that makes people motivated, and it ensures you as a company actually moves towards that vision, instead of just having these haphazardly defined projects all over the place. You're moving towards your true north, where you want to be. So that is important to spend some time on, and I can say, if it's one of the things that makes people proud of going to work, if they feel they are part of building something that is not just generating more revenue for the shareholders, right? So the specific approach to doing this is, I call it go slow to go fast, because we all want the results tomorrow, but it's worth taking the time to understand we'll do this in bite-sized steps, one by one. The first step, and you will be amazed how far you can go just by having people working together in new processes. You don't even have to think about, formally changing your workflows, but just making people talk about what they're doing and let them suggest how they can do better. This is a fantastic first step, because in the team that you're gathering, this can almost be done overnight. You will find in any established organization, if you put teams together and ask them, what could we do better tomorrow across the teams, you will have a lot of good ideas, many of which can be implemented immediately. And if you implement them, you will build the motivation to go to the next step, looking at the processes within the business unit. This is important, and it's important because if you're looking at the processes within the business units, then you're also not going outside the kingdom of one boss. And I'm saying this because when you go outside the kingdom of one boss, the effort of collaboration, coordination, and time you have to spend on stakeholder management is exploding. You have to do it at some point. But if you stay in your business unit and make your teams work together and change the processes in that business unit number one, you will generate results fast, which is good in many areas. First of all, fast results also means fast realization of benefits. So your revenue generation, your operational efficiencies will be realized quite fast. And this will spread like rings in the water to the other units, right? Because they will see, okay, that actually worked. Maybe when this team or these specialists, they come to us, we should listen because we can see it's working. The team who's working with you will also be motivated because they have this almost instant gratification of their work. It is not a 3-year project that we're looking into, but a 3 to 4 months project. So when you've started changing your project, this is where, even in many cases, before you do radical system changes, this is where you go to the next business unit because a lot of problems in companies today is actually found in the relationship between the business units, the handover of tasks between the business units. So when you start looking at engaging with the people in business unit 2, this is also where you're starting to create magic. And if you come with a proven case saying, we already did it, let's do it together now, then the chances are that they will be more motivated to do this with you are much higher. So it's very simple, but that's also why I believe it works. But it is important to not take on too big of a project, because it takes too long and involves too many people, and the results will come too far ahead. So what do we think? What are our key learnings from what we've been working with in Daman? I'd like to say one thing which I'm proud of. The way we think digital transformation in Daman is not so much digital transformation, it's just let's talk about how we can do things smarter. So we are very, very open and very, very focused on, as I mentioned before, also asking people, what kind of things do you see in your everyday that we can do smarter? Because the people who are working with the processes, they're also the ones who see the problems. And if you spend time listening and talking to them, you'll find again that a lot of them can be fixed with a stroke of a pen very easy. And that just builds to momentum, it builds to the motivation for change in the organization. So I think that's one thing that I can see is working in Daman, involving people, asking them, what do you think? What do you think? Instead of telling them this is what we should do, but really respecting that they know the best. It's one of the things that I believe is also a key to making all this work. Other things, and I think most of it have actually been mentioned in my talk so far, but some of the keys are not necessarily very expensive. It is about setting the truthful, believable vision. It is also putting together what I can call the perfect team, at least a team of people who want to do change, who are motivated to do something else. It just makes things happen faster, and you have less work on motivating people because they will already be motivated in working with this. Break down the silos. Yes, we spoke about this. Performance management. This is something I'll just come back to in a second, because this is really, really important. And the last point, we don't have time for this today, but if you want to know more about it, I would strongly suggest you to Google it. I think Boston Consulting Group is probably the best to write about it. Two-speed IT or bimodal IT. This is key. The second you start working with your processes and systems, it is key for your success that you adapt or adopt the two-speed IT line of thinking. It is not complex. I've done it many times. It's working. But for another discussion, let me go back to the incentives, because they're much more important than you can imagine. I mean, people follow the money, to say it bluntly. But it's a good idea to split the transformation incentives into two, the non-financials and the financials. The non-financials is very much the things, the vision that gives meaning to people, the recognition of people. I believe, and you probably know this much better than me, but I think it is number 2 in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That is actually after you feel safe and you're alive, then human recognition is the second most important thing in your needs hierarchy. I think it's number 2. So doing this and recognizing people publicly. I have examples of the employee of the month is allowed to invite his or her family to a celebration gathering. All these things have a huge effort on motivation. And of course, the financial incentives, which should be directly tied to outcomes. And this is back to the shorter you can make your projects, the more immediate you can make the financial incentives, and the more motivated you will get people. So make sure to set short-term financial incentives based on the success of the project. And especially when you start working across the business units, make sure that the teams in the different business units are motivated on achieving the same target. This is simple, but it works. It really works. So the last thing I just want to say, because this is, four key pieces of advice. In order to do this, you have to stop projects. Go slow to go fast. You cannot have all millions of projects running. 2 or 3 projects per team, end of discussion. You cannot focus on more. So you have to be bold and say what projects are actually vital for us right now and what projects we can look at later. Everybody thinks that their projects are the most important. So this is a tough decision. Reskill the people that you have in your organization. They still are experts in what they're doing. So instead of trying to say we need other people, no, spend time on educating the team that you have. Make sure it's added to the board agenda. If possible, have it on each board meeting, your transformation process or progress, because it just gives a completely different focus on the projects in the organization. And of course, whenever you do something right, make sure to celebrate it with everybody. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found it interesting. This is very close to my heart, as I hope you can tell.
Frederik, thank you so much. It's been very interesting and very enlightening. I'm sure that the audience will come through with the questions. I have a couple, and I'm sure that my good friend Vladimir has also written up there. I love this go slow to go fast. There's the whole thing about thinking as well with the book that came out. And I'm thinking back on my military experience, but we will get back to that later on. I think without further ado, I'm going to ask Hein van Eck. Hein, if you can give us your perspective as a healthcare provider on the whole process of digitalization. Over to you.
Sure, Johan. Let me just share my screen. And let me just maximize this. So first of all, very interesting presentation, Frederik. Thank you very much. Really, a lot of it resonates with what we're also experiencing on the provider side. If you'll allow me, I've got quite a number of slides today. So just bear with me. I'll be moving quickly through them, but I really want to take the audience just on a brief journey, not only on what we've done in the Middle East in terms of digital transformation and innovation, but I think it's important to understand what's happening in healthcare more generally, if we look at the worldwide scene. And then right at the end, I'll just pair it back to the pandemic and how it impacted what we did in Mediclinic Middle East. So let's jump right into it. I don't think I need to stress the point that virtual care has seen dramatic growth over the past couple of years. We can see in 2019, almost $29 billion spent on it. And then, of course, COVID hit the world. And that number is now projected to reach tenfold, almost $220 billion by 2025. So it's really mind-boggling numbers. You see a similar kind of trend in Europe. And of course, in Asia Pacific, slightly less, but nonetheless, very robust growth. If one looks at the healthcare disruptors, the only thing I want you to take out of the slide is there are many disruptors in the market, but look at the kind of money that's flowing into these deals. So these are startup companies that they're going through different rounds of, round A, B, C kind of funding. 170 million for HEAL, which is in the primary care space. In urgent care dispatch, you've got $407 million. And on the acute care side, medically home, $148 million. And that actually needs to be updated because I believe it was just last week that Kaiser Permanente and one other firm that now escapes me also invested in medically home. So lots of money flowing into health tech and these disruptors. If one just takes a second to look at the provider initiatives, I'll just touch on 2 or 3 of these. If one looks at Mayo Clinic at the bottom right, so what are some of the things that Mayo Clinic are doing? Of course, this is the #1 rated hospital in the whole world. They're focusing on developing clinical decision support solutions, right? So it's very much focusing on the clinical side. So a lot of their innovation and things focuses in that area. And you can see the same kind of thing for Seattle Children's Hospital, another very well-known facility, where they use big data analytics to provide faster and more accurate diagnoses to the patients. So decision support for the doctors, once again, focused on the clinical side of things. One more, if we look at Boston Children's Hospital, another household name, they use 3D operating models to allow surgeons to practice complex operations before they move into the operating room. So the reason why I just wanted to flag some of these are many big name hospitals are focusing on the clinical side of innovation and of improvement, which is absolutely needed and is very, very important. But I'd like to share with you now how the payers and the other side of the industry are also moving. So these three names need no introduction. These are the three biggest health insurers in the US, absolutely massive companies: Anthem, United Health, and Cigna. So what are they busy with? Anthem, if we just take two of the things, they've introduced a triaging tool. So basically a symptom checker whereby they want to determine and push the patient to the right doctor. So, in doing that, the aim is, of course, to manage utilization, to make sure that you try and save a number of unnecessary doctor consultations and such like. So that's one of the themes that they're doing. Another thing that they're doing is they've teamed up with drug maker Catalent to manufacture 6 to 10 of the most common and pricey generics. So what they're basically doing is they're cutting out the middleman, and they're taking a slice of the pie that normally sits with providers, either hospital groups, primary care clinics, or standalone pharmacies. If one looks at United Healthcare, a couple of examples, just like Amazon bought PillPack, United Health bought DiviDose, which is basically a home delivery, a pharmacy home delivery platform and business. And once again, cutting out the middleman, making sure they can use their scale to also negotiate better prices from the drug manufacturers, because they now control which drug gets dispensed to the patient, or at least they can influence it. If one use one more example for United, they operate 30 medical centers in Boston. So they're moving into the provider space. They're not just sitting on the insurer space. And this is a trend we're seeing throughout. If one looks at Cigna, they bought MD Live, which is a telehealth provider. So they're banking on the fact that telemedicine will be the, call it the staff, or not the staff, the gatekeeper model, the GP gatekeeper model of the future. So once again, an insurer moving into the provider space, trying to control more and more of the spend and where the patient goes. If one quickly touches on one or two others, AXA has got the same kind of thing as United Health. AXA is moving into primary healthcare. Their One Health initiative that they've implemented in developing countries such as Mexico, Colombia, and Egypt is really expanding quite quickly. And they expect to add an additional 50 clinics in emerging countries by 2023. And here you can have a look. It's a very nice look and feel of these clinics. And once again, control the patient, control the downstream referrals, and see whether they can also control what pharmacy drug items get dispensed in the primary care space. And of course, that is linked with an application that you can see on the left. A screenshot of it is shown. The United Health side, I referred earlier to DiviDose that they use. Here one can see how this app works. Just it gives you a bit of a feel for it. When you want to refill your chronic prescriptions, on the left-hand side, there's a good view on how they also manage patient choice. Because if you put it in an app and you show a patient very directly how their choice impacts what they pay out of pocket, you will get people changing their behavior. By way of example, reference pricing is a very good tool to push into these kind of solutions, because a patient can see, if I take the generic, I've got a 0% copayment. If I choose the branded drug A, I've got a $20 copayment, and branded drug B, I've got a $15 copayment. And then it's up to the patient to choose. So they have the choice, but there's a financial implication of that choice. Then we have the big virtual care vendors that are scaling. And here's a couple of names that you would have definitely heard about. Babylon, perhaps also about current health and peer therapeutics. Look at the numbers again. Total raised for Babylon, over $700 million US. That's absolutely mind-boggling. Peer, close to $300 million US. But once again, and we'll get to this point a little bit later again, the jury is out in terms of how effective some of these digital technologies are. Babylon, for one, has not been successful in the NHS. It's actually increased the number of consultations, of real-life consultations, because patients go through the symptom checker, the Babylon symptom checker, and in the end, quite often the checker says, well, we're not 100% sure, go and consult your doctor. And then it causes more utilization as opposed to the intention of causing less. But, okay, let me just see. Sorry, it's just getting stuck here. There we go. All right. And then if one look at the funding again, just once again, that big jump between 2019 and 2020 from, call it $7 billion US to 14 billion, of course, due to this COVID push and the absolute explosion in digital technologies. But none of this will be completed if we don't speak about the big tech giants. And there are very good reasons why we always have to keep an eye on these big tech giants. So these are household names that we interact with on a daily basis. They've gone by different names over time. They've been called Fagmas, and these days it's the Magmas because it's now Meta, not Facebook, and Google can also be called Alphabet. But let's just stick to the names we've got on the screen here. Just look at the number of active users on a daily basis, right? So these numbers are really, really impressive because often apps and applications interact with people once a month or once every 3 months. If you even look at the My Mediclinic 24/7 booking application, you're not going to see a doctor on a daily basis. And therefore, once a quarter, perhaps, when you go and see a doctor, you will interact with the app. You may use it more often to order some pharmacy items. But look at these guys. Amazon, which is the lowest, at 200 million, more than 200 million Prime members. And that's only their subscription population. Of course, there are many, probably 80, 90% of Amazon users are not Prime subscribers. So the number is actually much bigger. Microsoft, 1.5 billion Windows users. Look at Apple, 1.6 billion. Daily active users for Facebook, 1.85 billion. And then, of course, Google, the behemoth, is 5.5 billion searches per day. So just think about the data that these companies have and the touch points that they have with patients. And we'll come back to this in a short minute. Let me just see, it's 1 second. There we go. I'm having some digital problems myself this morning. If one looks at the cash that these companies are sitting on, it's important to show this because it speaks to how quickly they can move. Facebook, being the least capital heavy, has got $68 billion US worth of cash, sitting on their balance sheet. Apple, on the other end of the spectrum, $200 US. That's 200 billion US. That's absolutely frightening. Most countries in the world don't even have close to that kind of money. So here we've got companies with more money than countries. And therefore, any good competitors that come into the market or new innovations that come to the fore, these companies, because they've got the scale and access to people and to daily users, can pay a huge premium for those companies because they are able to unlock a lot of value from those acquisitions due to their scale. So they're always going to be, if they want to buy a company, they will be the company buying the company and not other bidders because they can unlock the most value out of it. Then another trend that is, of course, not slowing down at all and actually increasing of late is the out-migration of care, or should I say the migration of care. So since the 1990s, we've seen inpatient care moving to the daycare setting. Over time, more and more of that has occurred. Length of stays in hospitals has decreased as we move to more minimally invasive surgeries. And of course, from the daycare setting, it has moved to the doctor's rooms. And nowadays, your general ward patients are starting to move to the home care setting, the hospital at home, that most organizations are either working on or have already implemented. Remote patient monitoring at home. The technologies are really fantastic and improving every day. And home visits by nurses, being used as a support function to that trend we're seeing happening. But it's not only the out-migration that's happening, the migration is also happening. If I can use one example, we've seen a lot of work moving from the cath lab to the CT scanner. So if you think of angiograms, if you've got a 256 slice CT scanner, a lot of these heart scans, you no longer have to do the invasive angiogram, but you can actually just do a CT scan and see a wonderful view of the heart, 3D, that the doctor can maneuver around, which is why it's so important to be involved across the continuum of care. Because if you're not in radiology and you're only in the hospital business, you will not understand why some volumes are moving out of your cath lab. Then what are some of the driving reasons behind all this tech activity in healthcare? Really 5 reasons. The consumerization of healthcare, the explosion of health data, the demand for AI and automation, the enterprise interest in smart devices, and last but not least, the healthcare cost burden. And the problem in healthcare is innovation and new technology over time has always led to higher cost, not lower cost. In almost every other industry, new technology brings a lowering of the cost. But in healthcare, it typically leads to increased quality and better patient care, but at a higher cost. Because that new technology, the development of it, that costs something, and you don't really get economies of scale that comes as a result of these innovations. But I think we are going to see a big shift in this regard because of robotic process automation and all other kinds of AI initiatives happening at present. Then why are these big tech companies, if one talks of the magma firms, why are we concerned about them? I think conceptually, the problem is they've got access to this huge base of people that they interact with on a daily basis. Now that people use their services. The more people use their services, the more data they get. The more data they get, the more they can innovate on their products and make their products smarter, which will attract more people to their service, which means that circle becomes a virtuous circle and you have this data network effect. And that's why it's extremely difficult for any other company to catch them in that regard. So let's look at some of the things that they're doing, and I'll just very quickly touch on each one of them. Facebook, or Meta, is very light in healthcare, but even they are involved in healthcare. So they've got some innovations that looks at increasing the speed of MRI scans nearly 4 times, because they are able to basically upgrade with AI the granularity of some of these scans, and therefore you can have a quicker scan. They also did some work with New York University Langone regarding X-rays and reading X-rays for COVID-19 patients. But we're not really as worried about Meta at this stage. Apple is certainly one that we're keeping our eye on. They're not in the traditional healthcare space at present, but they are playing in 3 areas. The one is in data sharing and basically the data record. They want to make sure the data record is sacrosanct, it belongs to the patient, it will only be shared if the patient gives consent. So that's quite a nice and a clever approach that they're taking. Of course, we all know about the Apple Watch and the partnership subsidies that they put in. So the data that they're getting through that is absolutely amazing, or that the patient gets. And therefore, there's some great opportunities in that regard. And then establishing Apple's health and wellness services. So they're very much focused on the wellness side and the medical record. We all know about there on the left, you can see the medical record, just a screenshot. And we all know that the Apple Watch these days even has a built-in ECG that can pick up arterial fibrillation and any such issues on the patient. So for Apple, they will engineer an increasingly comprehensive picture of consumer health. We can expect Apple and Google to make smartwatches a standard of a member benefit. Of course, we know that Google owns Fitbit. They've bought Fitbit, so they're also in this space. And Apple could be the next big tech vendor directly competing with care providers. It'll only be a matter of time before they get to that space where all of this data clicks together, with the AI for them to be able to come up with something meaningful. If one looks at Microsoft, they're taking more an approach of focusing as the partner of healthcare providers and healthcare systems and healthcare insurers. So one example is their partnership with Epic, which is, of course, the very well-known EHR vendor from the US. So that Epic's EHR portal and their virtual health, their virtual visits or telemedicine runs on the Microsoft Teams platform. So very interesting to watch this space. Another thing that Microsoft did quite recently was to acquire Nuance for almost $20 billion US. So this is one example. So Nuance is the company that produces the Dragon software. Those who are in the provider space, it's a very, very well-known and widely accepted clinical documentation tool for doctors. We ourselves as Mediclinic Middle East use it, for the doctors to document quickly. It's a natural language to text tool. You can build in templates, so the doctor can say, draw up template for, a certain condition, and it pre-populates it for the doctor, and then they can just very quickly do their documentation. So very interesting to see that Microsoft moved into this, and it'll be interesting to see how they use this with some of their other initiative in order to be a better support provider to healthcare operators. So expect Microsoft to rapidly expand its market position, support enterprise and their health innovation. Microsoft will differentiate on AI strategy and governance rather than just building more tools. And Microsoft will work to provide the ROI on AR and virtual reality and IoT smart cameras. So a couple of very interesting things. A couple of years ago, they acquired one of these VR goggle firms that went bust. And of course, quite recently, we saw them also buy into one of the biggest gaming firms in the world. So this virtual world and getting stuck into that in cloud computing and all of that, it's certainly one to watch with their Azure cloud computing. All right, let's go to Google. Google in the early 2010s, around 2012, 2013, they had a healthcare arm. That's when the Google Glass came out. It was a nice gimmicky thing. Everybody got very excited, but the use cases for it wasn't really well thought through. So they then disbanded that healthcare arm of theirs. They reconstituted one around 2018, but that got disbanded last year again, if memory serves me correctly. And they put all their healthcare people in their different silos or different verticals, because they said healthcare touches every area of life, and therefore they took a more decentralized approach to healthcare. If one looks at where they're focusing, it seems to be that they're not focusing on competing with healthcare systems, but they're more focusing on using very specific AI and big data tech, and focusing on very specific solutions in healthcare that could disrupt specific areas. So if one just looks at retinal scans that they use, so 3 use cases that they've come up with. They've developed models to analyze retinal images and to identify more than 50 eye diseases. They also use eye scans to pick up cardiovascular disease by looking at the blood pressure of the blood vessels in the eye. And then the last but not least, they can pick up anemia in patients by just looking at scans of the eye. So really, really science fiction kind of stuff that Google is busy with, you know, in order to disrupt the business. And they follow a similar kind of approach when it comes to cancers and screening of cancers using you know, AI technology and interpretation of scans. So one to watch certainly, you know, Google's foray into this area. So what can we expect? Google's consumer health strategy and pace of innovation will remain fractured. Google and Microsoft's cloud offering will become cornerstones of the enterprise tech stack. The one thing that is not in here is, of course, Amazon. Amazon's AWS is probably the strongest when it comes to healthcare. So that's another massive provider. So all these big tech companies are playing in the cloud computing and health cloud computing space. And then as Google's healthcare AI evolves, a more expansive clinical user interface will follow. Right, so let's, last but not least, is Amazon. And Amazon is probably the one that concerns healthcare providers the most with their Amazon Care initiative that they launched. Jeff Bezos is very passionate about this. And as we know, Amazon is known not to be scared to push a loss-leading business. You know, if it means it's going to be a loss leader for 5 to 10 years, in order to eventually get to the scale to disrupt an industry, they will do that. And that's certainly, I think, the route that they're taking with Amazon Care. So they've started piloting it initially only for their own staff. Amazon Care is effectively a digital front end, you know, a virtual staff clinic, which they had in the beginning. And now they've rolled it out to other corporates. So they're really also seeing how they can cut out the insurance industry. They've now also started building clinics because it's very difficult only running a digital offering if you don't have some bricks and mortars, because you always need to connect with bricks and mortars. And if you control that part of it yourself, you can do a much more seamless integration. So they've just announced a couple of days ago that they would increase their number of clinic, the footprint, to 22 additional cities in the US, large cities in the US. So this is definitely one to look at. They also produce wearables, you know, wireless blood pressure cuffs. They've got, you know, the Amazon Choice app that you can use. That also integrates with the Apple Health app. And here's just a picture of the Halo tracker that they have. So what can we expect of Amazon? Expect them to expand its diagnostic offerings next. AWS, their cloud computing, will see this thing says slow growth in enterprise healthcare cloud services market. I beg to differ. I think we will see a strong growth, you know, if one looks at the offering that they have. And Amazon will pursue device sales through subsidized healthcare partnerships. So the impact, what are the impacts of all of this that I've mentioned thus far? You know, we've mentioned that payers are trying to control the healthcare entry points. They're trying to move into the space of healthcare provision. The big tech giants want a piece of the cake. They want to disrupt. They want to see which elements can they innovate on using big data, AI, and their scale, and the fact that they touch so many people on a daily basis. The new 24/7 delivery model, where all these virtual tools are helping us or patients to have access to care 24/7. And then, of course, this huge investing in health tech startups. But I think for me, the biggest takeaway is everybody is rushing to control the patient, if you will. And I say control lightly and with all respect to patients, of course, but everybody is trying to be the place where the patient goes to as a one-stop shop, the place, the portal that people engage with to read up, to Google, so to speak, their symptoms. You know, you want people to come to your ecosystem and not to go to Google to check your symptoms, because if you go to Google, you're bound to die, right? It always ends up telling you that your chances of dying is 5 or 10%. But jokes aside, it's the payers, the providers, the big tech companies are trying to control those entry points. So just the two last slides I wanted to share. The one is thoughts from Benjamin Schwartz, which came out quite recently, which I thought was very interesting. And he says, reasons, I believe, we're headed for a digital health bubble. And I totally agree with this. He says, first of all, we have unrealistic valuations of health tech startups. So just in the musculoskeletal space, there are 3 or 4 unicorn or near unicorn startups alone. Now, a unicorn, for those who don't know, means it's a $1 billion company. So for a startup to get to $1 billion means there are crazy valuations out there, in this space. The second thing is health tech is partying, healthcare is hurting. So every week you hear healthcare tech companies raising more funds, but on the ground, healthcare providers are really struggling. Our frontline workers are burnt out. They are totally overworked over the past 2 years. A lot of stress and burnout. And the problem is these two things are not aligned, because often these solutions are not solving those real problems. It's a nice, fancy, finicky things, but it's not solving those real solutions. And I think Frederik also touched on this point. The COVID overcorrection, we've had this the pandemic, everybody rushing to get online, big tech adoption. But of course, now things are coming back to a more sense of normality. So even for us, since we started with COVID, we've seen that huge spike in teleconsultations, but of course it's dropped off to where it's now roughly 3% of our consultations. Because why? There are certain consultations that you can only do with a face-to-face with a doctor. And secondly, patients still prefer it. So we're not at that point yet where people say, for all my healthcare, I would be happy, or for a big component of it, I'd be happy to use digital forms. And then, of course, too many solutions in search of a problem. Not a day goes by where we don't get contacted by vendors, with new shiny solutions. The problem is often these solutions are very narrow in focus, or they're developed by people who've got no understanding of healthcare and the complexity of healthcare. So it's tech entrepreneurs, they build a solution, they come to us, and it doesn't make sense to implement it in healthcare. And then the reality is catching up with the hype. We've had this huge hype, we've had this huge growth, and I think, getting the data, and what this gentleman is saying is, in order to maintain that hype, you need the data. And getting good quality data in healthcare is a very slow process and a very expensive process. And the data doesn't always tell the story that you want the data to tell. So, and I think this is exactly what the likes of Babylon and these companies are struggling with at the moment, and why we will probably see that correction. Then last but not least, if I just quickly look at the time, what did Mediclinic do? Thoughts on our journey and the lessons learned. We, of course, like all healthcare providers, had to go digital overnight when COVID-19 hit us. It was relatively easy to do because you didn't have to convince people that it needed to happen. In other words, your doctors were all on board, because without telemedicine, they couldn't access their patients, or their patients couldn't access them. So the doctors were all aligned. And secondly, the payers were all aligned, because they knew their members, our patients, wouldn't have access to doctors if they didn't get it signed up. So the two most tricky things to do in running these new initiatives were sorted out due to necessity. So where we are today, just quickly, we've got online appointment bookings and telemedicine as part of our My Mediclinic 24/7 application. We've got the UMA platform that we use for remote patient monitoring for chronic patients at home. That is a comprehensive chronic disease management program with pathways, protocols, everything put in place with dashboards, and that's something that we're going to market as we speak. We also have some other initiatives coming down the line, but in terms of other lessons, this artificially high adoption rate is coming down at present, that I've alluded to earlier. We have to look at how many integrations we have. We've learned that you implement something today, 1 year later, by the time you implement, it's almost outdated already. And you have to start looking at the future as to whether that vendor will keep on innovating or whether you need to look at other solutions. So this kind of plug and play and how you put all of this together in an ecosystem is a very important thing to get right. There's the point of having, do you go for one ecosystem or platform? That's the patient-facing one. Or do you go with multiple ones? And for us, the one thing that's important is this concept of a digital front door, whereby we want all these vendors to sit behind our digital front door, because you can't be married to one vendor forever. But you also can't have a specific vendor controlling your complete front end, because if you get to a place where you need to replace a vendor, you cannot do it if you don't control that front end. So this is a theme that we need to look at, so that you have a single sign-on and it doesn't feel to a patient that they're going into different applications when they click through to our different vendors. A point that Frederik also touched on very eloquently is a huge thing for us is capacity, the capacity of your people. We still need to keep the lights on. We see 97% of our business is not digital. It's bricks and mortar. It's real patients coming into our facilities. So we are spread thin in terms of the teams that work on this, the capacity. So we need to continuously work on beefing up that capacity, working on the agility. How quickly do we run these programs and, trial fast and fail fast. We need to grow in terms of our experience in implementation, but very important that we prioritize and focus. And that's why we've learned to say no very, very firmly when it comes to digital initiatives, because we've got very high priorities in this area. I've already spoken about the fact that it needs to solve real problems for patients and doctors and nurses, and not just for people sitting in corporate offices. And very important last point is all these solutions need to also cater for people who are not digitally savvy. We think of elderly people, we think of people who just are not interested in digital. And so even with a thing like telehealth, we always have an option of a telephone call as opposed to only a video consultation, because some people are just not comfortable with it, or they don't want to be people to see them, and they feel more comfortable to be just on the telephone. And we have to focus on that. We have to keep that human touch in everything we do, because digital cannot replace the human touch. It needs to improve the efficiency and the access and the experience of the human side of our business. So those are some of the sources of what I've spoken to, and thank you for your attention.
And thank you so much for a very insightful insight. Very good insights into what is happening in the world of healthcare. It was very, very interesting. I think we are running a bit out of time as far as questions are concerned. I think without further ado, Dr. Vladimir Janopolchek is Associate Professor in Strategy at the College of Business and Economics. here in the UAE, and I've asked him to deal with the Q&A. Vladimir is a strategy expert, experience in the business consulting world as well. So I think without further ado, Vladimir, over to you. Sorry, before that, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who do have questions, please use the Q&A function to raise those questions. Then Vladimir can have a look at them and then ask our two panel members to answer those that you might have. So over to you, Vladimir.
Okay, thank you very much. These two presentations were really, really interesting to me. And I am also personally and professionally interested in these areas, especially because I'm following up with these big disruptions and changes of the business models and how the big companies are entering the healthcare industry. So I've noted down several questions, and even before we started, I had maybe like 10 of them. Now I have 20, but we don't have the time, unfortunately, for all of these. But before I give you some of my questions, I just seen that, you know, there is a question just now popped up that they say that data moves with the speed of trust. So what can payers, providers and regulators do to make UAE a data-driven healthcare system? If you catch the drift. So I believe that this question can be applied to both of you. So the data moves with the speed of light. So what can payers, providers, and regulators do to make UAE a data-driven healthcare ecosystem? So I hope that one is clear enough. Dr. Rahul Goyal asked this question.
If you don't mind, I'll take a quick stab at it. Good day, Rahul. It's good to have you online. Of course, Dr. Rahul works in Malafi, which is the Health Information Exchange in Abu Dhabi, which is a great example, of course, of data being available and the transparency of data. So in terms of the speed of trust, if of course something like the HIE is a wonderful example, because you don't work in isolated pockets. You know, when a patient comes to you, people in the UAE tend to doctor hop quite a bit. So if you see that, if you have that access to the HIE, it does help you to weed out a lot of the unnecessary utilization in the system, because you don't need to, you see a fuller picture of the patient, because we as Mediclinic can then see this patient also went to, you know, SEHA, and we can see what kind of other conditions they have in order to paint that picture. So that's certainly one. For me personally, one that needs a lot of attention is the whole insurance approval process. I think we are still very archaic when it comes to insurance approvals. And when I say that, I'm not pointing a finger at the healthcare payers alone. It's the payers and providers can do a lot more to see how we can automate that, so that the payers have comfort that we're not doing anything untoward, but to make it simpler and faster for the patient. Because the patient is always the one stuck in the middle, right? You go and see a doctor. Now we tell you we can't take your blood because we first have to get the approval for this blood test, and the approval will come tomorrow. So we're going to call you back to the facility just to draw blood, you know, which is a real inconvenience to a patient. So I think the whole theme around insurance approvals is something we need to sit with payers in a partnership way to see how we can make it better for the patient.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Yes, Mr. Frederik, you want to add something?
Yeah, I like to underline the word trust used in the question, because I mean I'm really amazed about the way the UAE is working with data and data accessibility. And if you look at what's going on outside the UAE, in the US and Europe, you will see that the trend is that our users, the policyholders, they are starting to demand much more control over their data. I don't think we will see it in maybe 5 years or even sooner, that people, they simply won't allow Google or anybody else to use their data for anything, because they want to be part of the advantages. Why am I giving my data to you for free, right? And that comes with the trust, and I like that part of the question. So I think that we have to work on, all of us, is to increase the transparency towards the policyholders, the patients, and say, this is the data we have. It's maybe even easily available for you to see what we have, and this is how we intend to use it. So please give us your blessing to do so. I think this is what we have to work on in the whole industry, also in the future, to make sure that our customer policyholders are comfortable with the data that we have and how it's used. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. We have another question here in the Q&A section that is the anonymous attendee says, this sounds good and all, but in application, people tend to regress to what they're already used to. So my question is, how do you deal with conservative people that are unable to see the technological shift for the future?
No, but I think we are, especially in our field, I don't think we can force people to do something they're very uncomfortable with. I think it's our responsibility to offer whatever assistance our policyholders they need. I mean, at Daman we have physical branches, we have everything digital, we have the virtual branches, and we think this is part of our responsibility towards our policyholders, to give them whatever means of contact that they're comfortable with. Of course, you will always have, we even have a mobile branch that drives to you if you're uncomfortable getting out during the pandemic. And I think that is what we have to work with. I don't think we can go and say, from tomorrow on, you have to do everything digitally. Because, I mean, when we are in the healthcare industry, we are dealing with people who have a lot of emotions and uncertainties and are very, in many cases, uncomfortable, because it's their health, it's their future, they can be worried, right? So we can't just push them down to one channel that fits us. We have to respect where they are and meet them there. Thanks.
Yes, I would agree with that point. I think I also touched on it in the presentation. The fact we cannot force people. We need to adjust our models to make sure that patients can access our services in the way that they feel comfortable with. Totally agree with those sentiments.
Thank you. So now I'm going to jump before anybody else asks something. As I said, I have many questions. So first I have one or maybe two connected questions for Frederik, if you don't mind. So based on what you presented, and I think you really hit the spot with this comparison with Netflix and Google, and that healthcare center is basically expected to act, or their platforms to act as a Netflix one. So everything is chewed up for you. You just need to swallow, and that's it. And to be honest, I found myself in the same situation when I was. I am the user of Daman health insurance, and I used it recently, unfortunately. And you know, when I go into the app, you know, I expect that it works better, but it doesn't. You know, for me, I'm used to, I don't know, Instagram app, which is instantaneous, and it's just. And I understand there is a whole world behind the Daman app. So my question being very simple. You know, where are you in this digitization and digitalization continuum now? You know, going from one thing, which is only efficiency, to the other, which is the whole transformation. So where is Daman in this continuum? If
that's a great question. I think the answer is we're kind of all over the place in the sense that we are running many parallel projects to, as you say, improve user experience across our channels. We are also making sure that we can stay competitive by looking at our operations. We are making sure that we are compliant with all the regulatory requirements. And all of this is running in parallel projects. As I said, one of the reasons that we can do this is because we are working in a two-speed world where we have our core systems. That is one thing, but we also have some layers on top of these core systems that actually enables us to act fast to hear and present challenges. So I mean, we are releasing updates to the app. I think you'll see that we recently released integration with Uaeu-Cbe, which is the first insurer in the region who does that. So it's easier for you to log on more safely, and you will see constantly improvements to the app, and that's because we've changed the way we work with projects and our infrastructure so we can actually do so. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Just one question, or maybe it's not an easy question from Hein. I wanted to know, you explained all this, and it was very, very insightful for me to see how the magma companies are entering the market, and they have been doing so for quite some time, especially since I'm following what Apple is doing. So they are going, like you said, like all board. They have the finances. They can go and you know, experience even not making money out of it for who knows how many years. So is the reaction of Mediclinic, for example, and other healthcare providers in the UAE, I suppose when you do the external environment analysis, this is considered as one threat, but also I believe it can be an opportunity to some extent. So if we consider this as a threat from the outside, is your reaction the 0.9 that you put in the last slide, like the never lose the human touch? I like this part, you know, but because Apple cannot do this, and globalization also makes it easier for me that maybe in the future, who knows, Apple will, I'm using the Apple Watch and they are measuring all sorts of things, blood oxygen and all sorts of things. So maybe in the future they will offer me, look, Vladimir, we offer you a consultation with a doctor from US, I don't know, online. So they can compete with medical providers in the UAE. So is your response, or what is your response to these threats? Is your response the human touch or something else?
Yes, I think you've hit the nail on the head. You know, our response is to make sure that we are digitally enabled in such a way that it's simple, easy, a painless experience for the patient to interact with us, but always maintaining that human touch. Because that is the bit that the tech companies can't do. What we expect them to do is, you know, especially on the AI side, they might come in and take out a whole slice of the pie, if you will. If they come up with a solution, you know, that fundamentally, if you look at the Google one, if we were very big in ophthalmology and they bring out that slice and they put that into a commercial venture of sorts, that could have an impact, right, in terms of specific areas. But in terms of them taking over completely your patient base, I think the healthcare will always be a human business. And we just need to keep on iterating and making sure that we take away all these hurdles and it really becomes a wonderful experience for our patient, because we are not there at the moment. A lot of especially the administrative processes that happens when you come through our facilities, you know, patient will say, you know, it's wonderful coming to Mediclinic, but, you know, I had to wait here, or I was waiting, you know, like the insurance approval example that I mentioned, or why wasn't it easier for me to pay afterwards? So these kind of things we need to quickly catch up and make sure that becomes a really simple process for the patient.
I agree, because when you go there, I felt almost more sick after I left, you know, because it was very cold and I was waiting on so it took like 2 hours for something which was relatively easy, at least in my mind, you know, as a patient. We have another question. With increasing availability of personal data like wearables, for example, how can insurers pivot to better promote preventive care rather than transactional care? So this is an interesting question.
With many different lines of answer, right? Because it's not only that here is the data and now use it. You can see now Singapore, they did with Apple, and that was quite successful, right? So they've introduced the whole the Apple Watch to improve the health of the whole nation, and of course that is a dream. One of the reasons it works is because they are quite incentivized on pushing the Apple, and also because the residents of Singapore, they stay there, right? They don't go anywhere as a whole. In order for what you're asking of here to work, you need, I mean, obviously you can incentivize staying more healthy because that's good for you, and everybody should do that. But if you're looking at it from a cost perspective, a price perspective, then we would get the benefits down the road, right? The first year, chances are that anybody will reap the benefits of low claims cost or better health are low. And in an environment where we are shifting shifting healthcare providers insurers, healthcare insurers, year on year, it's a very difficult business model. That being said, the industry should be more focused on improving the health of the nation, and this is why one of our visions, as I said in the beginning, is to be in the healthcare hub of the UAE, to find ways of working together with everybody on improving the overall health of the population here. But it's a very interesting discussion, because there are few companies. Aviva Health are one of them who's done it really good in South Africa, right? Also with this tracking, but it also requires that people want to do it. And if you see, we launched in my previous world, I was part of a company who was really focused on car insurance, and we introduced telematics, pay as you drive. And it was, in my opinion, obviously, a fantastic scheme, and you could save a lot of money by driving fairly careful. Nobody signed up for it, because they didn't want to be monitored, even though they could save money. And I fear if even if you spend a lot of time of constructing a really exciting scheme on this, not many people would sign up. And I'm saying this because I can see the adoption of the various healthcare apps with healthcare trackers and what have you, not only here but in the world. It's not very high. So we all feel we should do something about it. But the second it comes to now, we're actually going to monitor you, and you're going to be, incentivized. Basically, not many people signs up. So I don't have the golden solution to this one. Of course, I believe personally this is something that everybody should be focusing on, because our health is the most important thing that we have. Thank you.
Daman, if I could perhaps just add one or 2 points to that. I think the one thing that makes it very difficult in the UAE, as Frederik mentioned, of course, changing policies is, in the UAE, but also the big expat population. So people aren't here for that long, right? Some people are here for 3 years, some for 5 years. And the thing with wellness is you don't get the benefits of leading a healthy life in year one. It's a continuous thing that you need to do. You reap the benefits over a period of 10 or 20 years. Now, what Discovery did in South Africa, the Vitality program that everybody knows about and has really gone global, they've really focused on behavioral economics. So putting the financial incentives and linking that to the health that the people do. So a couple of years ago, we had the CEO of Discovery Health speak at our conference about 4 years ago. And the one thing he mentioned was that they give patients or their members the Apple Watch. Okay. Then, if you don't utilize it enough, you have to start paying. So you get the benefit first, and you can lose that benefit if you don't use that benefit. And that really worked a lot, as opposed to asking people to be healthy first, and then you get the Apple Watch. So very interesting, these kind of behavioral economics that comes into it. It is very difficult to get people to do the right thing. We all know it's human nature. You know it's the right thing not to do certain things, but yet you don't do it on a daily basis.
Yes. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I think unfortunately, we have run out of time. We could probably go on for another hour, but my undertaking and arrangement with the participants and delegates was we end at 20 past. It's been fascinating to listen to both your points of view. Frederik, thank you so much. When can I come and pick up my Apple Watch? I prefer the dark one. No, jokes aside, it's been fascinating to listen to the two perspectives, and one can really actually see, what needs to be done and how can it be done. And on the other hand, we see what is being done. And I think the two presentations gelled wonderfully. So we have a wonderful perspective of healthcare and the world of digitalization. Coming from Africa, I think there's a lot of potential there in the emerging countries, in the rural areas, where it can play a role in so many fields, and where currently it is playing a role, but on a very low scale, with the opportunity to upscale. So both of you, thank you so much. Vladimir, thank you for dealing with the Q&A session. It's been a wonderful session, and I'm in the debt of all three you gentlemen. And hopefully we can use you again sometime in future to tap into your minds again about what is now happening. To the delegates that are still online, we have been recording this session, and it will be available on our website, where you can go and look under Executive Education at the College of Business and Economics website. We are there, and there's a specific media section where you can go and listen and watch the recording. Gentlemen, once again, thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day, and may 2020 be a much better year than the previous 2 years as far as health is concerned. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.